The moment I realized my wedding was no longer about me was the moment I stopped crying. Funny how humiliation works. At first, it burns. Then suddenly something inside you goes cold instead. I stood frozen near the altar while 200 guests pretended not to stare directly at the disaster unfolding in front of them. White roses lined the aisle. Soft violin music floated through the ballroom. Cameras flashed quietly from the back of the room. And directly beside my fiancé stood another woman. Not a guest, not family, not someone accidentally drawing attention. No. She stood there comfortably, confidently, like she already belonged next to him more than I did. Her name was Vanessa. And from the second she entered our lives 8 months earlier, everything between me and Adrian started changing. At first, Adrian insisted she was just a business partner. That phrase always becomes dangerous eventually, because emotional betrayal rarely starts with obvious cheating. It starts with excuses that sound reasonable enough to ignore. Late-night calls, private meetings, inside jokes you're suddenly excluded from. Then one day you wake up realizing your relationship has become crowded by someone who was never supposed to matter. I noticed it slowly. The way Adrian's face changed when Vanessa walked into rooms, the way conversations between them felt too familiar, too intimate, too effortless. Meanwhile, I became the difficult one anytime I questioned it. "She's important to the merger," Adrian would sigh. "You're overthinking." "Why are you acting insecure?" Classic strategy. Make the woman doubting betrayal feel irrational until she stops trusting her own instincts. And eventually, I almost did. Until 3 weeks before the wedding. That was when I accidentally walked into Adrian's office one evening and found Vanessa sitting on his desk laughing while his hand rested casually on her thigh. Neither of them noticed me immediately. That image burned itself permanently into my memory. Not because of the touching itself, because of how natural it looked. Comfortable, practiced. Like I was the outsider interrupting something already established long before I discovered it. Adrian jumped up instantly afterward. "Claire." But Vanessa didn't look embarrassed. That was the terrifying part. She looked annoyed. Like I created inconvenience by walking in. The fight afterward lasted hours. Adrian swore nothing serious was happening. Vanessa claimed I misunderstood the situation completely. Somehow by the end of the argument, I became the emotional problem threatening important business relationships. And because I loved him, I stayed. God, that sounds pathetic now. But love makes intelligent people negotiate with disrespect far longer than they should. So there I stood on my wedding day, pretending everything had survived. Pretending trust still existed. Pretending the woman standing beside my fiancé wasn't slowly replacing me emotionally right in front of everyone. Then came the moment that destroyed everything completely. The officiant smiled warmly toward Adrian. "And now," he said, "the groom may say his vows." Adrian took a deep breath, turned toward me, and then looked directly at Vanessa instead. The entire room went silent instantly. Even the musicians stopped playing, because suddenly everyone realized the same horrifying thing at once. This wedding was no longer about marriage. It was about humiliation. And deep down, Adrian had no idea he was about to lose far more than just me. At first, I genuinely thought Adrian was joking. Some awkward attempt at humor, a nervous mistake, anything except the truth unfolding in front of 200 guests. But then he smiled at Vanessa. Not casually, tenderly, and every instinct inside me went cold. "Before I continue," Adrian said softly, still looking at her instead of me, "there's something I need to be honest about." The ballroom became painfully quiet. I could hear camera shutters stopping one by one in the back of the room. Even the wedding planner near the stage looked frozen in panic. Vanessa lowered her eyes modestly like she was embarrassed by attention. But I noticed the tiny smile she tried hiding. That smile told me everything. She already knew. My stomach twisted violently. "Adrian," I whispered. Finally, he turned toward me. And for one brief second, I saw guilt. Real guilt. But not enough to stop. "I never wanted to hurt you," he began. That sentence alone made several guests visibly uncomfortable, because everyone knows no good speech starts that way during a wedding ceremony. "You and I built something meaningful together," he continued carefully. "But sometimes life changes unexpectedly. Life changes. Interesting way to describe betrayal. Around the room, whispers started spreading quietly between guests now. My mother looked horrified in the front row while Adrian's father stared straight ahead, refusing to react publicly. And Vanessa, still standing beside him, still comfortable, still not leaving. I suddenly realized she never expected this to stay private. This had been planned, every second of it. Then Adrian said the sentence that finally shattered whatever hope remained. I fell in love with someone else. A sharp gasp moved across the ballroom instantly. My chest tightened so painfully I almost lost balance. But somehow, I didn't cry. Not yet. Because shock protects you at first, like your body refuses to let reality hit all at once. I looked directly at Vanessa slowly. She finally met my eyes now. And there it was. Victory. Not guilt. Not shame. Satisfaction. The kind that only exists when someone believes they won something. Adrian stepped toward me carefully. Claire, please understand. Understand what? I interrupted quietly. My voice sounded strange even to me. Too calm, too empty. That you invited 200 people here to publicly replace me? Silence. Adrian rubbed the back of his neck anxiously now, clearly realizing the room wasn't reacting the way he expected. Maybe he imagined honesty would look noble. Romantic even. Instead, it looked cruel. You deserve someone who truly loves you, he said softly. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because men always become philosophers once they've already destroyed someone emotionally. I stared at him for several long seconds before finally asking the only question that mattered anymore. How long? Adrian hesitated. Vanessa answered instead. 7 months. The honesty in her voice sliced deeper than the affair itself. 7 months. Almost our entire engagement. Suddenly, every happy memory from the past year became contaminated all at once. The dress fittings, the venue tours, the tasting dinners, all while they were secretly building another relationship behind my back. I looked down briefly at the diamond engagement ring on my hand, then back at Adrian, and that's when something shifted inside me completely. Because suddenly, I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was finished. Adrian noticed it instantly too. Claire, he whispered carefully. But I stepped backward slowly away from the altar, away from him, away from the humiliation. And as the ballroom watched in complete silence, I realized something Adrian still didn't know. The fortune funding his entire company merger legally belonged to me. The moment I stepped away from the altar, panic finally appeared on Adrian's face. Real panic. Not guilt, not regret. Fear. Because deep down, he sensed something had changed permanently. Claire, wait, he said quickly, following me across the ballroom floor. But I kept walking. My wedding heels echoed sharply through the silence while 200 guests watched the ceremony collapse in real time. Some looked horrified, some uncomfortable, and a few, especially the investors seated near Adrian's family, looked suddenly nervous. Interesting, very nervous. Behind me, Vanessa called softly, "Maybe we should talk privately." I stopped immediately, then turned slowly toward both of them. For the first time all day, the room had my full attention. "No," I said calmly. "I think we've done enough things privately." Complete silence. Adrian swallowed hard, because suddenly the power inside the room was shifting away from him. I looked directly at Vanessa. "You wanted honesty tonight, right?" Her confident smile faded slightly. "Good." Then I faced the guests. "I'd actually like to thank everyone for attending," I continued softly. "This probably would have been a beautiful wedding." Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. And somehow that calmness terrified Adrian more than screaming ever could. He stepped closer, lowering his voice urgently. "Claire, don't do this." Interesting phrase, because according to him, public humiliation was acceptable until he became the one at risk. I looked at him carefully for a long moment, then finally asked, "Did you ever plan to tell me before today?" His silence answered fast enough. Of course not, because this wasn't honesty. It was performance. A dramatic public moment designed to make him feel brave while leaving me emotionally destroyed in front of everyone we knew. But Adrian forgot one very important thing about me. I wasn't dependent on him, not emotionally anymore, and definitely not financially. I slowly removed my engagement ring while the ballroom watched. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably now. Maybe because reality suddenly looked uglier from inside it. I placed the ring carefully on a nearby champagne tray, then smiled faintly. I hope she was worth it. Adrian's face tightened immediately. Claire, please. No, I interrupted quietly. You don't get to beg for dignity after taking mine publicly. Several guests looked down instantly. Even Adrian's mother appeared ashamed now. But I wasn't finished. Because if Adrian wanted honesty tonight, then honesty was exactly what he was about to receive. I glanced toward the investors seated near the front tables. Men who spent the last year treating Adrian like a rising business genius preparing for a major merger expansion. A merger funded almost entirely by my inheritance, though most of them didn't know that part yet. You should probably know something before this evening continues, I said calmly. Adrian froze instantly, and that reaction alone told me he finally understood where this was heading. Claire, he warned quietly. But I ignored him, because after 7 months of betrayal, I was done protecting him. The Crawford Tech merger everyone's celebrating tonight? I continued softly. It only exists because my family financed it. Confused whispers exploded across the ballroom. Several investors straightened immediately. Adrian looked pale now, very pale. I smiled without warmth. You see, I added carefully, Adrian's company was almost bankrupt 14 months ago. One investor near the front frowned deeply. What? Adrian stepped toward me quickly now. This isn't the place for business discussions. Funny. He suddenly cared about appropriate timing. I looked directly at the crowd. My grandfather's trust provided emergency capital through my holding company. I paused briefly. Which means, technically, I let the silence stretch intentionally, then finished. I own 51%. The room exploded instantly. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests started whispering over each other while investors pulled out phones immediately, checking information with expressions that turned darker by the second. Adrian stood completely frozen, because suddenly the night wasn't about his affair anymore. It was about control, and he had just realized he never actually had it. Vanessa looked between us in visible confusion. What is she talking about? Adrian ran a hand through his hair aggressively now. Claire, stop! One of the senior investors stood up slowly from his table. Adrian, is this true? Silence followed, heavy silence, and Adrian's hesitation answered before words could. Several guests began murmuring louder, shocked by what they were hearing. I watched the panic spread through the room carefully because for the first time all evening, everyone was finally seeing the real version of Adrian. Not the confident CEO image he sold publicly, but a man whose empire existed because the woman he humiliated chose to save it quietly. 14 months earlier, his company had been collapsing under debt. Investors preparing to walk away after a failed expansion nearly destroyed everything. That's when I stepped in privately through my grandfather's trust, acquiring controlling shares discreetly through holding structures that kept ownership hidden. Adrian knew where the money came from, but only a few executives understood the full structure. Vanessa stared at Adrian now with growing alarm. You told me you built everything yourself. That sentence changed the air instantly, because suddenly Adrian wasn't just exposed as unfaithful, he was exposed as dependent in a way that stripped away the identity he had built around success. I stepped forward slowly. You should all understand something, I said calmly. The ballroom quieted again as investors, board members, and guests turned fully toward me, realizing the scandal had expanded far beyond personal betrayal into corporate collapse. You wanted honesty in front of everyone, I continued, looking directly at Adrian. So let's be honest. The company survives because of me. The merger survives because of me. Adrian stepped forward sharply. Enough. But I didn't stop. And tomorrow morning, the board receives my resignation from all financial protections attached to your expansion deal. That sentence landed heavily across the room, and one investor cursed under his breath while another immediately left to make urgent calls, understanding exactly what it meant. Without my backing, the merger no longer had financial stability, and everyone in the room understood that instantly. Adrian stared at me like he was finally seeing the full consequence of everything he had done, not emotionally this time, but strategically. Vanessa stepped back slightly from him, Just enough to notice, and Adrian noticed it too. Then he lowered his voice desperately. "Claire, please, we can fix this." I looked at him for a long moment before answering calmly. "You already made your choice at the altar." Silence returned again, and for the first time all night, Adrian had nothing left to say. The ballroom no longer looked like a wedding reception. It looked like the aftermath of a financial disaster. Investors stood in tense circles, whispering aggressively while board members avoided eye contact. Phones rang constantly near the back hallway as people scrambled to understand how much control I actually had over Adrian's company. And standing in the center of it all was Adrian, completely unraveling, loosening his tie roughly while executives pulled him aside one after another, demanding answers he clearly didn't have prepared. Arrogance makes people careless, and Adrian spent so long believing he controlled the narrative that he never imagined I might eventually speak. Vanessa approached him cautiously now. "You said this merger was secured." "It is," Adrian snapped immediately, but nobody in the room believed that anymore, especially after several investors already started leaving. One older board member, Mr. Whitaker, walked directly toward me then, cold, brilliant, ruthless in business, the kind of man who only respected leverage. "Miss Laurent," he said carefully, "perhaps this situation can still be negotiated privately." I smiled faintly. "What exactly are you hoping to negotiate?" His expression stayed professional, but tension flickered beneath it. "The company's future." "I never intended to hurt the company," I said calmly. "I only intended to marry someone who respected me." That sentence silenced him completely, because everyone in that ballroom understood the truth now. This entire disaster was avoidable. Adrian simply chose ego over loyalty. Across the room, he was arguing quietly with investors while Vanessa stood beside him again, but her posture had already changed. The confidence was gone, replaced with something uncertain, almost trapped. "I think we should leave," she whispered to him. Adrian looked exhausted. "Just give me a minute." "You told me she wasn't involved anymore," she added. And I almost laughed softly because the truth beneath it was clear. She didn't steal a man, she chased a successful future. Adrian noticed me watching, and his expression shifted. Pain appeared there now, real pain this time, not for losing control of business, but for realizing the woman beside him was already emotionally distancing herself the moment his power weakened. I stepped toward him one final time. "You know what hurts most?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. "I would have given you everything willingly. Not because you earned it, because I loved you." His face broke completely then, and for the first time tonight he looked truly ashamed, not exposed, ashamed. But it arrived too late. I removed my wedding veil slowly and placed it onto an empty chair beside us. Then I looked at Vanessa, who still couldn't meet my eyes. Because deep down she finally understood something she hadn't accepted before. She wasn't chosen because she was special. She was chosen because Adrian confused attention with love. And men who do that eventually betray everyone, including the person they leave you for. The ballroom had gone quiet again, but this silence was different now. Not shock, not confusion, resolution. Like everyone was waiting to see what the final consequence would look like. Adrian stood in the center of it all, no longer speaking, no longer arguing with investors. The fight had drained out of him completely. Vanessa had already stepped away a few feet, as if distance alone could protect her from what was collapsing. I could feel every eye in the room still on me, waiting, judging, calculating. But I wasn't the same woman who walked down the aisle earlier tonight. That version had already died somewhere between the vows and the betrayal. I looked at Adrian one last time. "Do you understand what you did?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately, because now, for the first time, there was no audience performance left to protect him. Finally, he spoke. "I made a mistake." A mistake. That word almost made me laugh again, because mistakes are accidents. This wasn't an accident. This was choice after choice after choice. I stepped closer slightly. "You didn't just choose her," I said softly. "You chose to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered to us." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it, and that silence was louder than any apology could be. Behind us, investors were already discussing damage control. Phones were still ringing, legal teams were being called. Some guests had already left entirely, realizing the company they were attached to was now unstable. And Adrian noticed it too. His empire wasn't falling in one moment. It was being abandoned in real time. Vanessa finally spoke again, quieter now. Adrian, I didn't know about the ownership situation. I turned toward her slowly. For the first time, she looked small, not powerful, not confident. Just another person caught inside his consequences. I believe you, I said calmly. She blinked in surprise, because I wasn't angry at her anymore. Not really, she was just a symptom, not the source. I turned back to Adrian. The merger will stabilize, I said, but not under your leadership alone. His eyes widened slightly. What does that mean? I held his gaze steadily. It means the board will vote tomorrow. The words landed heavily, because everyone in that room understood what a board vote meant when control had already shifted. Adrian stepped forward slightly. Claire, please don't do this publicly. I paused, then answered quietly. You did this publicly. That was the final truth he couldn't escape. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Just years of history hanging between two people who no longer recognized each other. Then I did something unexpected. I removed my second ring, the one he had given me before the ceremony, and placed it into his hand. Not angrily, not dramatically, just finished. I loved you, I said softly. But I won't compete for someone who already made their decision. His hand closed slightly around the ring, but he didn't try to give it back, because he knew it was already over. I turned away from him then. And for the first time all night, no one stopped me. Not him. Not Vanessa. Not the room. As I walked through the grand doors of the ballroom, the night air outside felt colder than I expected. But lighter too. Behind me, I could still hear the faint chaos of a company trying to survive its own collapse. But it no longer belonged to me. Neither did he. I stood alone for a moment outside the mansion, looking back at the life that had just ended inside those walls. And I finally understood something important. I didn't lose my wedding. I didn't lose a man. I lost a version of myself that accepted being second in someone else's story. And tonight, I chose to stop.